So will the Spurs one day become the OKC Thunder's main rival?
You are Locked On Spurs, your daily San Antonio Spurs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Spurs. We're on the Locked On NBA Network. I'm your host, Jeff Garcia, Spurs writer for Ken's 5 San Antonio. Glad to have you all back. Hope you're having a great work day. And as always, we appreciate you making Locked On Spurs your first and only spot for all things San Antonio Spurs. Find us on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Ken's 5 Plus app. You know what to do. Go subscribe right now. Do that. We'll definitely appreciate it. You guys are the everydayers. Keep coming here every single day. What are we talking about today? We're going to be looking at the future. We can get to a crystal ball right now and just kind of ask that crystal ball. Give us a peek to the future. Will the Spurs one day become the Thunder's main rival? Yeah. We're going to be asking the crystal ball, looking into that crystal ball, seeing what needs to happen for that to happen. Then get into the Locked On Spurs comments, and then another buy-sell question for our guest, who unfortunately couldn't make yesterday's roundtable, but he's here. So we saved one just for him. Hopefully he didn't see the other episode because then he knows the answer to it. But I think he didn't see that show. So but we'll definitely surprise him in just a few seconds. Hey, before we bring him on, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Let's bring him on. He is Matt Guzman, everybody. He is with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Follow him on X at MattGZMan. Matt, we missed you yesterday, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I got my times wrong a little bit, but I'm glad I can be on today.
All good, all good. You see, instead of sharing the spotlight, now you get to have it all to yourself now. So it kind of worked out, right? Right?
Yeah, that was my plan. My plan from the start.
This was you. We're like, yeah, my evil plan. And I don't have to share the platform with anybody, just all to myself. But anyway, all good. No, but it was a fun episode. You definitely going to like the buy-sell question I have for you later on the show. Again, everybody, he is with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Again, he's on X at MattGZMan. So why is Matt here once again? We're going to be looking at our crystal ball and be asking, will the Spurs one day emerge as the Thunder's main rival? Now, before we get to what the Spurs have to do, Matt, let's talk about maybe some teams that are probably there already. And I want to start off with the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves, they're not at the level of OKC, but they're there. They're in the ballpark. Do you think maybe a Minnesota, maybe a Denver? Is there another team out there, maybe a Houston, that more than likely is or probably will be the Thunder's main rival before the Spurs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to your point, the Timberwolves are kind of already there. They've had several matchups, several meetings in the playoffs thus far, and you say the Timberwolves. I also look at the Nuggets, who the last 2 years have had good face-offs, whether during the regular season or in the playoffs. You add in the fact that Jokic and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander were fighting for the MVP award, and a lot of the tensions were high. And I would say that those two are two of the West powerhouses, along with the Thunder. The Rockets might be a little young. I don't know if they've gotten as far as they would have liked to be considered among the top of the Western Conference. So I think right now it's Timberwolves and Nuggets, and I think that those two will continue to be highly anticipated matchups. They will be the NBA is gonna hype those up and get attention on those games, especially with Jokic and SGA. But I do think that the Spurs, which we're going to talk about here shortly, I think that they have a chance to really escalate to a rival type team for the Thunder, because their timelines are going to be overlapping at some point.
Yeah, exactly. And, going back to the Nuggets there, the Nuggets were banged up in the playoffs. You had Michael Porter, with a busted shoulder. Gordon was dealing with his issues. He definitely Jokic. He was all he could, but he needed help. They weren't there. They had injuries. And it was a near depleted, injury-riddled Denver team that took OKC to 7 games. So you got to wonder what happened if they were healthy. Who would be looking at maybe the Nuggets right now playing against the Pacers in the finals. But nevertheless, the Thunder are a powerhouse team right now. They are heads above the rest. Their win differential last season was historic. I think they were winning by 20-plus points last year. They are a powerhouse, fashioned by a former Spur, Sam Presti. So he is the architect of what you're seeing out in the Thunder. I'm going to throw another team out there and get your thoughts on this that probably will become a rival faster than the Spurs, the Dallas Mavericks. I know, say what you will about the Doncic trade, but still, that's Anthony Davis, when healthy, Kyrie Irving, a Cooper Flagg, Derek Lively. You see them perhaps emerging faster as an OKC rival than the Spurs?
You know, I see them, joining the ranks and becoming contenders, especially over these next couple of seasons with Cooper Flag. And I think a lot of the reservations around the trade, obviously, was that, we don't know what the timeline with Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving are because, both those guys are aging stars. Both of them have had injury concerns in the past. And so, you throw in Cooper Flag, all of a sudden that team, gets a much needed boost of youth. And I could see it being, very competitive over the next couple of seasons. But, once Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving kind of take a step back, it becomes Cooper Flag's team or whoever else they entice to join by that point. I could see them being competitive, but I will say I think that, apart from this next season and maybe the season after that when, the Mavericks are going to be in their quote unquote prime, with Cooper Flag and Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving, I think besides those couple of seasons that we're about to hit, I think the Spurs will be rising faster with Victor Wembanyama compared to Dallas and Cooper Flag.
Yeah, there's going to be a moment in the future, hopefully sooner than later, where the Spurs are just going to click, make it the right deal, and then here we go. It's the time for OKC and Spurs to fight it out. I would love for it to come back. I would love for that old school, the Lakers-Spurs rivalry back in the early 2000s, for the Spurs to have that rivalry now with the new kids on the block. That is the Thunder. Now, Matt, the Thunder, they are a powerhouse team, but this is a different NBA. You got financial concerns, apron this and apron that, and pay this guy and pay that guy. The financial landscape of the NBA has really shaped, what power teams in the NBA look like. If you were to look at it, there really hasn't been a dominant dynasty. And when you had the Raptors win, the last one maybe was the Warriors, I think. It's the Raptors win it one year. It's the Nuggets win it one year. It's Boston win it one year. What do you think about that aspect of it, the financial aspect, and there's kind of more parity in the NBA?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's what the NBA has been looking for. I think they mentioned it quite often, especially with Victor Wembanyama going to the Spurs, and now you got Cooper Flag going to Dallas, to kind of replace Luka Doncic, which I know a lot of people were really upset about or making their speculations what might be. But, either way, the league is definitely turning a leaf. There's going to be less favor toward these dynasties because, like what you're seeing with the Celtics, the last 3 seasons, they've been extremely competitive. They were in the finals against the Warriors, that last championship that they won. And since then, they've consistently been atop the East, consistently been in that finals conversation. And now this offseason, especially with Jason Tatum's injury, you might be looking at the beginning of a fire sale because they just can't afford to keep paying all their players the way that they have been. I don't think the Thunder are going to have as big of an issue with that, but there are going to be concerns in that regard, more so with the Thunder than the Spurs or the Mavericks or even the Lakers, who are really going to shell out for Luka Doncic essentially. And so I think you're right, but it's been an interesting landscape to watch with, the parity versus true dynasties that we've been used to seeing for all these years.
Yeah. Again, I'm sitting back listening to you and I'm thinking, it's like there really hasn't been that repeat champion in quite a while. So you got to wonder now, gone are the super team days or the super power teams with consecutive titles. Is that gone too? I think maybe the Thunder, they got probably the best shot to defend if, they keep everybody together and no major injuries. So outside of them, the West or just the NBA title could be wide open. And you wouldn't even talk about Cleveland or in the East or Detroit that's fast on the rise. What about the Lakers? Sure, they have an aging, quote unquote, LeBron James, he's still doing it, but Luka's there now, they're going to rebuild. So we'll see how this all happens. All right. So there are some teams that we think that could be in the way of the Spurs becoming the chief rival to the Thunder. But what do the Spurs got to do? We're going to talk about that. Coming up next right here on Locked On Spurs with Matt Guzman. He's with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Follow him on X at MattGZMAN. NBA fans, let's talk about DoorDash. You know what time it is. It's playoff season, and that means big performances and even bigger rewards. DoorDash is bringing the heat with a slam dunk deal for Dash Pass members during the 2025 NBA playoffs. It's called They Swoosh, You Score. Anytime a player scores 50 points or more in a playoff game, Dash Pass members get themselves a free 3-piece crispy tender combo from Wingstop the very next day. Just place an order of $20 or more. Use code Wingstop50 at checkout, and that combo is yours. Crispy, delicious, totally free. Offer valid noon until midnight the day after the game. Terms apply. Look, there's so many reasons why you got to use Dash Pass. What if you're just needing those $0 delivery fees? DoorDash has that for you with the Dash Pass. Exclusive perks like this one. There's so much you can use with the Dash Pass. You got to get it right now. Hey, maybe you're thinking about ordering wings, right? For the next big game. Well, imagine getting that food, free food, just because somebody went off for 50 points or more. So here's the play. Sign up for Dash Pass. Unlock this and more exclusive deals all season long. When the player scores 50-plus points in a game, in a playoff game, that is, Dash Pass members can grab a free 3-piece crispy tender combo from Wingstop the next day with a $20 or more order and code Wingstop50. That's Dash Pass. Your door to more savings, more flavor, and more ways to win. Terms apply. And we're back right here on Locked On Spurs, joined by Matt Guzman. He's with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Follow him on X at Matt GZ. Man, you definitely got to follow him. He has some good articles out there. I think he had one recently with about Flynn coming up soon, or is that out already?
That's right. No, that's scheduled, actually. It's done. So,
all right. So there you go. Malachi Flynn. So you get that and so much more by simply following Matt on X at Matt GZ, man. All right. So we're talking about whether the Spurs will emerge in the future, hopefully sooner than later, as the Thunder's chief rival. Now, we named some teams that could be in the way of that, namely Minnesota and Denver, maybe Houston, but there is still that window for the Spurs to become that rival and maybe topple the mighty OKC Thunder. All right, so let's see. Well, the first thing they got to do, I think you got to build on the Wemby versus Chet rivalry, right? I think that is your starting point right there. I think that is kind of the ignition point where the Spurs-Thunder rivalry can become a thing. There's a two, unique, unicorns in the NBA. You got the Wemby being Wemby, you got Chet being Chet. They both seem to have that intense rivalry on the court. So I think if we're going to check boxes, do these teams have players that they can clash and have battles against, a la Shaq and Tim Duncan, David and Hakeem Olajuwon? Now you got Chet and Wemby. So I think we got the main player pieces in place, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I think the NBA especially has really tried to hype up, Chet versus Victor, and I think it's actually gotten to a point where, the players themselves aren't really thinking about it. It's more so the fan bases that have been, I think there was a lot of animosity that first season with Victor because of the whole Rookie of the Year debate.
Oh, yeah.
And ever since there, the Spurs fans in general just have a hard time watching OKC be successful when, they've been sitting near the bottom of the West themselves for, last several seasons. But, I think you're right. The pieces are there. You have De'Aaron Fox, you have Stephon Vassell now emerging, assuming there isn't a big blockbuster trade.
Right.
But more specifically, you have Victor Wembanyama. And I think, just between him and Chet Holmgren and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, we've even seen them on the international stage, when Shai was playing for Team Canada and Victor was playing, over with France. And so I think there's going to be a lot of aspects about that matchup that make it enticing and make it seem like a rivalry, especially as these players continue to get better, or, if the Thunder continue their run of success.
Yeah, you look at the players, we did mention Wemby, Chet, so check, maybe Castle and Shea, check. You got D Fox, Jalen Williams, check. So it looks like the Spurs, the pieces are in place to become, a threat to OKC. So we're good on that. Now, talk about the coaching aspect, though. You got Mark Daigneault, who seemingly is, he's got his team in the NBA Finals right now. So that tells me he's a pretty good coach. And you got Mitch Johnson, who's just starting his official NBA head coaching campaign. So that's something to keep an eye on. You might see, the OKC Thunder coach kind of out coach Mitch a few times, but Mitch is definitely going to have to catch up, and I think he will. Let's talk also about this as well, is the fact that these two teams, despite their ends of the spectrum here, Spurs and rebuild, Thunder at the top of the NBA right now, they do have past rivalry back in the days of at least the part where the Spurs big three were fading out. At that time, it was the Thunder big three, Durant, Westbrook, and Harden. They were emerging. So there is a little bit of history there. They had some competitive playoff battles in the past. So again, check. But if we're looking future forward, Matt, the first thing the Spurs got to do, they got to just get in the playoffs, right? I think you can't be a main rival unless you really get a taste of the playoffs. You get seasoned a bit to maybe really give the Thunder some run. Your thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. The Spurs have a ways to go before they reach the same echelon that Thunder are operating under right now. And it's funny you said, what do the Spurs have to do? First of all, they have to beat the Thunder.
Yeah.
I was looking into it a little bit, and since Victor has arrived in 23, they're 2-5 against Oklahoma City. Victor's only played 4 times. It's just not much of a rivalry at this point. I think the Spurs, have been figuring things out the last couple of seasons, but as we talked about in the past, I think this upcoming season, there's a lot higher of expectations for San Antonio to make the playoffs or to make a run at the playoffs. And I think it's one of those things where, when you have one thing, so the other thing comes as well. And I think if the Spurs are to make a run at the playoffs, having some victories and some success against Oklahoma City is also going to come.
Yeah, the Spurs are going to have to start stringing together some not just regular season winnings records. They also got to get into the playoffs. I don't care if it's via the play-in or just getting 1 through 6. They got to get into the playoffs ASAP just to, start being on the periphery of letting them allow past the door into the chief rival status. Like, we mentioned Denver and Minnesota, possibly Houston, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that. So the Spurs got to start winning now, and the pieces are in place for that to begin. The draft is just right around the corner. Dylan Harper likely will be a Spur. We don't know yet, but that's what the consensus vibe is. So he's going to help fuel the Spurs get into a winning record, hopefully to challenge the Thunder. But as of right now, the Spurs are not even in the league of OKC right now, so they're not even on the radar. But you got to get them on the radar. Let me talk to you about this, though, Matt. For the Spurs to get on the radar, what do you think about this? Do they have to get into the play-in? Would that be enough? Or they got to get beyond that? So let's just say they get in the play-in next season, and the next season again, they get in the play-in, but they still don't crack the playoffs. Is it really playoffs or bust for them to get into the conversation of being an OKC rival?
I don't think so. I'm not so sure on that one. I think that if the Spurs are to make the play-in tournament, I think, again, it comes back to, how did those games between the two teams go, during the regular season? Is Oklahoma City the reason that they're in the play-in versus, a spot at the top 6 or but, if they are to make the play-in, and I think there's a little bit of a difference between cracking the top 6 and making the play-in for the 7 and 8 seed, like you mentioned. There's a good chance that if the Spurs do make it out of the play-in, they'd be facing Oklahoma City in the first round. And I think, if the Spurs can steal a couple games, make them work for it, or, if they pull off an incredible upset, against the Thunder, then at that point, you're well within the range of being a rival for that team. But yeah, I don't necessarily think it has to be playoffs. I think that they're, like I was mentioning earlier, it's naturally going to happen if the Spurs are going to start to creep their way up into OKC's radar.
Yeah, for me, I think they have to get into the playoffs. And not only that, Matt, I think they got to get a top 4. I'll give them top 5 seed. They got to be a close to a top team to even, be in the same ballpark.
Yeah,
with the Thunder. Because if they're an 8 seed, they get in that way and they get stomped. That really a rivalry of OKC just crushes them. But if they're a power team, 1 through 4 in the West, now we're talking. So the Spurs definitely do have a ways to get there. Look, the gap between OKC and SA right now is huge. It's massive. It's going to take some time. We're not saying the Spurs are going to be the rival for OKC starting next season. They ain't going to happen. Not even after that. But they got to start getting some W's. They got to start getting some playoff wins. They got to start winning series. So as you can see, the Spurs have a ways to go. Now, we talked about this in the first segment, and I think it bears repeating. The financial situation definitely is going to be an issue. And I think that's something both teams can probably not avoid. The Spurs, we're already talking about it, man. Wemby's going to have to get paid. Castle's going to have to get paid. You don't know what's going to happen with Devin. Dylan Harper, if this Spurs pick him, was going to have to get paid. So there's that financial cloud that's looming right now over both teams. So that's something to keep an eye on. Look what happened in Boston, Matt. That ownership jumped ship. They jumped ship because they didn't want to pay the price tag anymore. So how much do you think the financial side will impact OKC, a possible OKC Spurs rivalry?
Yeah, I think, when it comes down to it, the main pieces of any Spurs or Thunder rivalry are going to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren, maybe Jalen Williams. And then on the Spurs side, Stephon Castle, De'Aaron Fox, Victor Wembanyama. I think those are going to be the 3 pieces from each side that, you're really going to want to look at. And regardless of what happens with the Thunder, financially, their biggest worries are going to be, retaining guys like Isaiah Joe or
Yeah.
Kaysen Wallace or Alex Caruso, who have been incredible, secondary stars, role players behind those big three in Oklahoma City. And I think, that's really what's going to impact the Thunder the most, is whether they can keep, the roster as it's built together. I don't think they're so much worried about keeping their stars on the team. And the same goes for the Spurs. There's a reason that they likely won't go for Giannis because of the financial implications, so I think regardless of financials, the teams are going to be able to keep their core stars together. You're still going to have Chet and Victor. You're still going to have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and De'Aaron Fox or Stephon Castle, someone like that on the Spurs end. And I think it'll kind of help keep that rivalry alive.
Yeah, now you hit on the final point here, inadvertently, but again, if the Spurs do make a swing for Giannis, maybe a Kevin Durant, or maybe another star that's, we don't even know about, that changes everything. If they do bring in, we just use Giannis as an example. Giannis, generational player, in his prime years right now, has about 3-5 years left of good quality play. That changes everything almost overnight. So that is something to keep an eye on. But barring that, if the Spurs just want to not skip steps, as they've been saying, then it's going to be quite a while before the Spurs are the Thunder's chief rival. But we know what they got to do, mainly just win, get in the playoffs, win some playoff series, cut this play-in / playoff drought now, and let's get the ball going. All right, so those are our thoughts, whether or not the Spurs will emerge as OKC's main rival. We believe they will be. It's just going to take a while before they get there. What are your thoughts? Let Matt know on X at MattGZMAN. Let me know by going to Locked On Spurs YouTube page, subscribing, leaving a comment, or we do the future episode, because that's what we're going to do right now. When we get back, we're going to talk about Locked On Spurs fan comments, and then have a buy-sell question for Mr. Matt Guzman. He has no idea what I'm going to ask him. So let's see how he reacts.
A little scared.
A little scared. All right, coming up next, right here on Locked On Spurs. Ever talk about Monarch money? Hey, look, every time you check your bank account, maybe you start wondering, oh, well, where did all my money go? Well, between dining out and online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Look, Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, spending in one place, and you just stop managing your money and you start building wealth. Look, they got surprising insights. You can realize just how much you're spending on food deliveries, for example, and they now make you budget smarter. All-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you use one app, the Monarch app, check your finances, track spending, even plan long-term goals. What about easy collaboration? Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. The code is LOCKEDONNBA. That gets you half off your first year. And we're back right here on Locked On Spurs, joined by Matt Guzman. He is on X at MattGZMAN, Spurs on Sports Illustrated very own. He's going to talk about that in just a few minutes. By the way, everybody, during the break, I asked him, does he want his surprise question first or the fan comment first? He's like, no, let's go with the fan comment. So he has no idea what I'm going to ask him. So we'll get his raw reaction to the question here. It's a good one, too. Let's just put it this way. Yesterday's panel, when I asked it, they had a collective gasp. So heads up. That's the only clue you're going to get. All right, Matt, okay. Let's knock out this Locked On Spurs fan comment here. This one comes from Joe Low B4Q. Now, the commenter says, if the price is right, it's good. Now, he's referring to Kevin Durant. This is not skipping steps. This is a step up. And he gives it a good example here. If you buy a fixer-upper house and need a front door and find a door that works properly for cheap, well, you buy that too. Later, when the door doesn't work correctly, you get a new door or put the door on you've been creating yourself. So basically, he's saying, look, if the price is right, you get KD, and this is not skipping steps. This is just building on a rebuild. What do you think about that take?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we talk a lot about the idea of skipping steps versus doing it, quote, the right way, the way the Spurs have done it for years and forever and always. And I think there's a big difference, if the Spurs this offseason had, sent Vassell, Jeremy, Keldon, Harrison Barnes, 3 firsts for Giannis. And then they turned around and, they sent Wesley and who else do we have? I mean, we got Stephon Castle and the number 2 pick for, Lowry Markkanen or Jaylen Brown. I think that's when you're saying, hey, they're really skipping steps. They want to, escalate to we need to win this season or next season or we're out. And I think there's a stark difference between doing that or, going after a star who seems to, be needing a new home, who seems to have had mutual interest with the Spurs, and he come comparatively cheap. You're not going to have to give up 5 players and 6 picks. You're going to give up, 2 players, couple picks, because, the Suns don't have leverage with Kevin Durant specifically. So I think it's fair. I don't think the Spurs are, necessarily skipping steps. They made all the steps necessary. They accrued a bunch of draft capital. They have drafted a lot of young players, and they've kind of they've started to build their rotations and figure out who fits where. And I think, it's not necessarily a bad thing to say, our best interest is to flip a couple of these guys and some of our picks that we've worked to earn, to accrue, and let's send it out for Kevin Durant. Let's make our roster a little bit better. I don't think he's that star that you send your entire roster for, which is why I think it's a fair take.
Yeah, I agree with the commenter there. Yeah, it's, again, look, it's the NBA, man. You got to win. And if you're going to, that process of winning and getting back to the NBA mountaintop is trading, whether Durant or Giannis, John Morant, whoever it is, if that's what it takes, then you got to do that. And look, I hate to break it to you, Spurs fans, but the organization is probably not likely listening to y'all when it comes to the GMing side of things. All right, they're going to do their way, and if they feel that trading for a megastar is going to help, so be it. So be it. Now, look, they got a war chest of draft picks. They got to burn. Just use them. They can't draft every single player what they got. They got to use them in some way. So, what better way to bring in a power player now, or at least maybe in the near future, to help the Spurs push forward and maybe do become the OKC Thunder's chief rival and then overtake them and sitting in the NBA Finals right now instead of watching OKC representing the West. So there's reasons why you skip steps and go for a Kevin Durant. All right, that was a good comment there. We appreciate it. Keep them coming. We definitely need y'all's help here as the offseason continues. Give us some of your questions, your thoughts. We'll read them in the future episode of Locked On Spurs. All right, so Matt, you're up to bat here. So yesterday's show, we had a roundtable discussion. Unfortunately, you couldn't make it, but the ending segment was a surprise segment where the guest, James Pleasure and Rudy Campos, they had no idea what was going to ask them when it came to a few buy or sell questions. Now, this is not one that I'm saving for you, okay? So that was for a few seconds, but just get your thoughts on one buy or sell question here. Buy or sell, Vassell will finish the season as a Spur. That's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
Yeah. I'll give you the consensus vibe once you're done with the panel side.
I think I'm going to say buy.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily because they're going to trade him mid-season. I think, I guess here's my take. If Devin Vassell is on the roster, at training camp to begin the season, like it's clear that they have decided not to go for Giannis or Kevin Durant or name your star this offseason. I think he finishes the season with the team. Yeah, but I think I'm leaning more toward the fact that something will go down, and I think that he might be the star piece of that trade.
Yeah. Well, you agreement with the panel. Yeah, we all said yesterday it's likely that he won't finish the season a Spur. All right, so now for your question here. Here we go. Buy or sell that if the Spurs do draft Dylan Harper at number 2, Harper will have a better rookie season than Steph Castle. Yeah, see, that was the same reaction the panel got yesterday. Everybody was like, man. What do you think?
No, that's a good question. I don't think so.
Ooh, interesting.
I don't think so. Okay. I think the circumstances were way different, right? Because you got Stephon Castle at number 4, and you were expecting him to kind of play second fiddle to Chris Paul and kind of be next to Victor Wembanyama just to kind of learn the ropes. When he turned that into, granted you had injuries to De'Aaron Fox and Victor, and Castle kind of got a lot of those minutes near the end of the season to kind of play around and really show, to get as much production as he could. But at the same time, what he turned his situation into, just a number 4 pick. I mean, he outplayed all 3 of the guys that went before him. He outplayed, all the guys that went behind them who had great seasons, like Jalen Wells. Unfortunate injury to Jerry McCain. We don't know what that would have looked like, but I think what he turned his situation into was, he completely overperformed, but he showed, what his ceiling, what his capabilities are, and kind of cemented himself as one of the core pieces that the Spurs are going to either want to keep, for a very long time, or he is a piece that can be turned into a mega star, as sad as it would be to see him go. And I think Dylan Harper is already kind of up against the wall. You got Cooper Flagg in front of him, who's expected to have, that kind of season that Castle had last year, the kind of season that Victor had his rookie year. And I think he's going to be great, but I think he's also stepping into a team that's much more built than the team that Castle is stepping into. Because now you have De'Aaron Fox, you have Castle also, you have Victor Wembanyama, you might grab somebody else in the offseason. It's not that he's going to be bad, it's just that his role isn't going to be as independent as Castle was able to have halfway through the season and moving forward. So that's the reason I say that. I don't think he's going to have a bad rookie season, but I think Castle's was very unique. And I think, he turned his situation into something much greater than we expected, that anyone expected it to be. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. During that conversation, Pledger, kind of, I wouldn't say raise the bar, but kind of raise the bar by saying, well, what's a better rookie season? Because remember, Castle won Rookie of the Year. So does Harper have to win Rookie of the Year in this scenario? Knowing that Flagg is out there, I mean, VJ Edgecombe, could be a threat. So there was that aspect of it. But if you're going with the roster presently constructed, I think Harper could technically have an edge in that question because he will have the benefit of a healthy Fox and Wemby for as long as they could. Obviously players don't play 82 games anymore, but they definitely have them longer than what Castle did. There's that. Who knows the new schemes that Mitch Johnson's going to implement? Just divert from Popovich's way or do his own thing. That's a factor there too. But again, the biggest thing that why the panel thought he probably won't is because he'll likely be a bench player. But then again, Castle started off as a bench player, and just injuries forced him to be a starter, and then he took off. Right. But it's definitely an interesting question. Rudy Campos, he said that he predicts a three-peat when it comes to the Rookie of the Year. He picks him over Flagg. What do you think about that?
I could see that happening. I think it's just that there's so much. It's the same. If Victor had the season that he had last year in his rookie year, and he got a blood clot and he's out, didn't get Rookie of the Year. All of a sudden you don't have that on your resume, and I think there's all this pressure. Like Cooper Flagg is the consensus number one pick. He's the consensus Rookie of the Year. He's the consensus next coming of Luka Doncic in Dallas, and I think there's so much pressure on him. There's no guarantee that he ends up, hitting all of those milestones, getting Rookie of the Year in Dallas. It's anybody's game, and I think Dylan Harper would be a close second because of what he's expected to bring to any team he joins.
Yeah. It's a great question. I think it's something I'm going to be watching out for to see how his. And again, I'm trying to start a rivalry between these two kids. I just want to see, how much. I mean, you're hearing all this hype about him. Is he really going to be that much better than Castle? There are some scouts out there that written scouting report says, he has a potential for being better than Castle, mainly because of the outside shooting. That's a huge edge. But interesting. See, Matt, now you're off the hot spot.
That was a good question. That was great.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to expand this. I think probably one of the topics, where we dive deeper into Locked for is this question: could Harper potentially have a better rookie season than Castle? Because I mean, look, Spurs are probably smiling year to year having that problem in their hand. Like, oh no, another Rookie of the Year candidate, not that. So all in all, I think it's good times for the Spurs. He is Matt Guzman with Spurs on Sports Illustrated. Follow him on X at MattGZMAN. Matt, tell us what you got going on over at Spurs on Sports Illustrated.
Well, like I mentioned, the Malachi Flynn piece is done, so that should be coming out very, very soon. And then I'm still waiting to find out if I'm going to go to New York for the draft. The NBA has not communicated that yet. So if so, then we'll have draft coverage live. If not, I'll be in the facility like we were last season.
Absolutely. Well, either way, whether you're in New York at Barclays or with me in San Antonio, you'll be fine covering all things silver and black. Again, he is Matt Guzman. Follow him on X at MattGZMAN. You want to do that ASAP. And for everybody else, we thank y'all for making Locked On Spurs your first listen every single day. Free and available wherever we get podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Kens 5 Plus app, YouTube. You know where to go? Go subscribe right now. By the way, for your second listen, check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow gets you caught up on the latest draft rumblings and interviews and workouts, et cetera, et cetera. Go subscribe to it right now. Locked On NBA on YouTube. Do that right now. We'll be back tomorrow talking all things silver and black. I believe Raul Dominguez is back. Yeah, he's on deck. So we're going to talk about all things silver and black. Maybe about that Castle Harper topic we've been throwing out. Seems to get all the guests here kind of like perking up. Like, what? Oh, no. Yeah, that could possibly happen. All right. Well, we'll talk about that probably tomorrow on Locked On Spurs. But for Matt Guzman, I am Jeff Garcia. We're going to put a lock on this episode of Locked On Spurs.